Good evening, and welcome to the Debate Arena. I'm Iris Bell, your host for tonight. Our motion is losing weight using GLP-1 cheating. Two teams of 4 debaters will clash across 4 rounds. Opening statements, 10 minutes of free debate, questions from our 100 audience members, and closing statements. The audience votes all night long, and the side that converts the most minds takes the crown. But first, our coaches settle who picks sides the old-fashioned way. Rock, paper, scissors.
We're taking pro. Seizing the definition of cheating early lets us set the trap and crush them. We blitz the stage with raw firepower on shortcuts versus discipline and slam the door shut before they get momentum.
Sides are set. Team B argues for the motion, Team A against. Coaches, show us your lineups. Before a single argument is made, audience, cast your first votes. Let us see where this room stands. Round 1, opening statements. Pro trails in the early vote, so they open the night. First speaker, 2 minutes 30. The floor is yours.
Okay, I see that 16 to 83 on the scoreboard, and I get it. You think we're being total buzzkills. You're sitting there thinking, it's a modern medical miracle, Sasha. How on earth is that cheating? But hear me out for 2 minutes, because as a medical ethicist, I'm telling you we are falling for a dangerous biological illusion. Cheating, by definition, is taking a shortcut that bypasses fundamental, necessary effort to claim an unearned result. And GLP-1s do exactly that. They don't build metabolic health, they rent it. Look at the latest 2026 data. A massive Oxford meta-analysis in the BMJ, published this January, evaluated over 9,000 patients. The moment people stop taking these shots, they regain 60% of their weight within a single year, returning completely to baseline within 18 months. Why? Because zero behavioral or metabolic adaptation occurred. You skipped the lifestyle work, so your body never built the engine to sustain it. It gets worse. American Diabetes Association data shows up to 40% of weight loss on GLP-1s is lean muscle mass, not fat. We are literally sacrificing actual physical structure for a quick scale drop. That's not healing, that's physiological debt. Gallup confirmed just last month that 11% of U.S. adults are currently on these injectables, yet JAMA Network Open shows nearly 65% of non-diabetic patients quit within 12 months because of out-of-pocket costs or side effects. So what happens when millions drop off? A massive regain rebound, damaged muscle mass, and a degraded baseline metabolism. When you shortcut the neurological and lifestyle work required for real, sustainable health, you aren't solving a crisis. You're outsourcing your satiety to a lifelong subscription while hacking your long-term biology. That is an unfair shortcut. That is cheating. Don't buy the quick fix fantasy. Turn this scoreboard around. Vote pro.
And now the con side answers. First speaker, 2 minutes 30 on the clock.
The other side argues that using a GLP-1 medication is a shortcut that bypasses natural effort. Pro Sasha Petrova. But framing a neurochemical recalibration as a moral failing fundamentally misunderstands how the human brain functions. Let's break this down in 3 clear steps. First, consider the neurobiology of chronic obesity. When someone lives with obesity, the hypothalamus undergoes persistent biological stress, altering leptin signaling and locking the brain's metabolic set point at an artificially high baseline. Expecting willpower alone to override a dysregulated hypothalamus is like asking someone with severe astigmatism to just stare harder at the board. Second, look at what these drugs actually do inside the brain. A May 2026 NIH-funded study revealed that newer GLP-1 medications penetrate deep into regions like the central amygdala and mesolimbic reward pathways. They don't destroy human agency. They quiet the relentless background dopamine chatter, what patients call food noise, so that normal, conscious decision-making can actually take place. Third, restoring a broken biological pathway to baseline function is the definition of medicine, not cheating. Just this month, in August 2026, Yale neuroscientists show that GLP-1s recruit specific agrep hunger neurons to trigger genuine metabolic adaptation. This isn't a short-term trick or a biological illusion. Pro Sasha Petrova. It's a precise chemical repair that allows the body's natural satiety systems to communicate correctly again. When you recalibrate a broken biological thermostat, you aren't cutting corners. You're giving the brain the baseline tool it needs to function properly. That isn't cheating. That is modern neuroscience restoring human health. We can completely flip this debate right now by choosing medical reality over moral judgment. Vote con.
Now for the heart of the night. Free debate. 10 minutes on the clock. Sides alternate, and any debater may raise a hand to claim the floor. Whoever holds the floor when time expires may finish their thought. Debaters, ready.
Look, tweaking agrap neurons sounds impressive, but the other side calling lifelong chemical dependency a repair is complete sleight of hand. Con Aurora Lindquist. When an athlete takes a synthetic compound to mute fatigue and bypass physical conditioning, we don't call it neuroscience, we call it doping. You're replacing organic biological work with an exogenous cheat code. Look where this leads. The American Society of Health Systems Pharmacists reports U.S. prescription drug spending is crossing $1 trillion in 2026, driven by GLP-1s. We're legalizing metabolic doping and locking millions into a lifelong pharmaceutical subscription. That's an unfair shortcut, pro Sasha Petrova. That is cheating.
Look, the other side makes a fair point about the romance of raw willpower. It sounds terribly noble, but calling targeted metabolic therapy doping ignores economic reality. Page 42 of the June 2026 NBER study shows GLP-1 treatment saves middle-aged adults up to $193,000 in lifetime healthcare costs, with the largest savings going directly to working-class Americans who bear the brunt of chronic disease. Withholding effective medicine just to demand physical suffering isn't protecting fairness, it's enforcing health inequality. When modern treatment prevents catastrophic lifetime medical debt, using it isn't cheating, it's basic economic justice.
Saving money on healthcare by signing up for a lifelong drug subscription isn't economic justice. That's just moving your debt to a different cashier. Con Marcus Cole. Look, as a neuroscientist, I love a good brain hack, but overriding your body's evolutionary feedback system with a weekly shot is like slapping a piece of black duct tape over your car's check engine light and calling yourself a master mechanic. You haven't repaired the engine, you've just muted the warning bell so you can ignore the smoke under the hood. Tricking the dashboard without doing the actual mechanical work is an unfair shortcut. That's cheating.
A warning light is only useful if the sensor is accurate. Pro Rosalind Fleur. When a dysregulated brain sends constant false hunger signals, the dashboard itself is broken, not the driver. Let's test the other side's logic against basic public policy. When medicine introduced statins for cholesterol or beta blockers for high blood pressure, nobody claimed patients were cheating cardiovascular exercise. We celebrated a public health breakthrough that prevented massive mortality. So tell us, at what exact clinical threshold does treating a chronic, deadly condition cross from life-saving medicine into a moral offense? If targeted pharmacology is cheating, then every public health triumph of the last century is guilty.
Equating GLP-1s to statins misses the entire legal reality. Statins manage a discrete biomarker. GLP-1s outsource basic lifestyle effort while creating a systemic liability crisis. Look at federal court dockets today. Under multi-district litigation 3094, over 4,700 federal product liability lawsuits are pending in 2026 over severe gastrointestinal injuries, like stomach paralysis. That's why 88% of commercial insurance plans now mandate strict authorization barriers. Offloading personal effort onto a drug that generates thousands of injury claims isn't a public health triumph. It's taking an unearned shortcut while leaving society with the legal and physical bill. That's cheating.
Pointing to product liability suits misses how medicine actually works. Every major therapeutic breakthrough, from early insulin to modern biologics, required managing clinical risk, per Bennett Kane. Let's trace the actual logic here in 3 simple steps. First, compulsive overeating and substance abuse share the exact same neural reward architecture in the brain's lateral septum. Second, August 2026 NIH findings show GLP-1s don't just mute appetite, they re-establish executive control over those shared craving pathways, significantly reducing alcohol and nicotine abuse alongside binge eating. Third, when a compound repairs the shared biological root of compulsive reward behavior, that isn't a cheat code, that's a fundamental leap forward in addiction medicine.
Look, framing systemic chemical overrides as addiction therapy sounds brilliant, but it ignores basic system architecture, can Aurora Lindquist. In tech, patching the user interface without fixing the underlying source code is just accumulating technical debt. That's GLP-1s in a nutshell. An August 2026 Annals of Internal Medicine study proved semaglutide doesn't actually improve underlying insulin resistance any better than legacy drugs. It just spoofs the scale. You're outsourcing a core, evolutionary feedback loop to a proprietary weekly patch. Spoofing sensory inputs without upgrading the internal hardware is taking an unfair biological backdoor, pro Sasha Petrova. That isn't upgrading the system. That's cheating.
Comparing human metabolism to buggy computer code is cute, pro Emmett Wilder, but the other side isn't actually mad about biology. They're just addicted to suffering as a moral flex. Look at the psychology. An April 2026 study from Rice and UCLA found that people judge someone who loses weight on a GLP-1 more harshly than someone who doesn't lose weight at all. Why? Because of effort moralization. This weird puritanical obsession where if you didn't suffer, sweat, and chew raw celery until you cried, your health doesn't count. We don't call it cheating when you take ibuprofen for a headache instead of meditating through the agony. Demanding pain isn't ethics. It's just a fetish.
Dismissing medical ethics as suffering fetishism sounds slick, but it completely ignores clinical reality. Look at what's happening right now in 2026. While patients with severe diabetes face chronic drug shortages, medical spas are selling off-label GLP-1 microdoses so healthy elites can drop 10 cosmetic pounds before vacation. That's boutique distributive injustice. When a critical medicine is poached as a luxury shortcut,
starving supply for people in real biological failure, just so affluent folks can skip basic lifestyle work. That is an unethical backdoor. That isn't healthcare. That is cheating.
Look, the other side makes a deeply compassionate point about supply allocation. Nobody wants a diabetes patient turned away at the pharmacy counter. But economically, calling high demand an unethical shortcut fundamentally misunderstands how industrial capacity scales. It was that exact market volume that drove over $10 billion of private investment into global fill-finish manufacturing capacity. By mid-2026, as FDA data confirmed supply stabilization and oral formulations expanded access, unit production costs began plummeting. High early demand didn't steal medicine, it financed the industrial infrastructure that is now making it affordable for everyone. Calling market scaling cheating ignores basic economic reality.
Financing factory assembly lines doesn't rewrite neurobiology. You're just mass-producing a cheat code that mutes human joy. Look, May 2026, University of Virginia research proved these drugs penetrate deep into the central amygdala, blunting dopamine across your entire reward circuit. That's why psychiatric journals are exploding with reports of anhedonia and emotional blunting. Patients aren't just losing interest in late-night pizza, they're losing interest in intimacy, hobbies, and everyday happiness. Numbing your brain's entire capacity for joy just so you can skip lifestyle effort isn't modern medicine, it's chemical emotional flattening. That's an unfair shortcut. That's cheating.
The other side claims that dampening neural reward pathways is a tragedy, pro Rosalind Fleur. But tell us, who hijacked those reward pathways in the first place? For decades, federal policy permitted industrial food manufacturers to engineer ultra-processed products explicitly designed to override human satiety and hyperstimulate dopamine. When the commercial food supply is engineered to force biological failure, using medicine to neutralize that trap isn't taking a cheat code, it's biological self-defense against a rigged market. If corporate policy is allowed to weaponize human neurology for profit, why is public health forbidden from protecting it? That isn't cheating, that's defense.
Calling a drug prescription biological defense ignores how actual risk assessment works. Look at life insurance underwriting in 2026. When applicants lose 50 pounds on a GLP-1, major carriers don't lower their rates. They automatically add half that weight back onto their actuarial profile. Why? Because hard data proves it's rented weight, not permanent biological adaptation. When the legal and actuarial systems treat your physical progress as a temporary paper illusion, you haven't defended your health. You've falsified your ledger. That's taking an unearned shortcut. That's cheating.
Actuarial tables lag behind medical reality because legacy insurance algorithms track historical averages, not active cellular biology. Let's trace the actual science in 3 clear steps. First, human evolution spent 2 million years hard-coding adaptive thermogenesis, a defensive reflex that drops resting metabolic rate during weight loss to prevent famine. Second, July 2026 clinical data from the University of Colorado's plastic trial confirms GLP-1s drive structural synaptic remodeling in hypothalamic circuitries, dismantling that ancient starvation trap. Third, using technology to override an evolutionary mechanism designed for the Stone Age isn't falsifying a ledger, it's biological adaptation. We can completely flip this round right now. Vote Con.
Time. That is the bell on free debate. What a battle! We now hand the microphone to the room. Audience, this is your moment. 10 minutes of questions. Raise your hands.
How do we prevent tech billionaires from privatizing health access permanently?
The other side claims that overriding 2 million years of human evolution with a weekly shot is just a smart biological upgrade. But to our startup founder over there, if you want to stop tech billionaires from privatizing health access permanently, stop buying into the cheat code. Look at what's actually happening right now. In 2026, data shows pharma giants have wrapped these GLP-1 molecules in massive patent thickets, averaging nearly 20 overlapping patents per drug, while dragging competitors into federal court to lock down market exclusivity. When you replace fundamental lifestyle effort and human metabolic self-reliance with a proprietary chemical, you aren't democratizing health, you're surrendering bodily sovereignty. You are literally renting your own metabolism from a corporate duopoly. Billionaires privatize health access when we normalize taking unfair biological shortcuts that turn basic human function into a lifelong proprietary subscription. Bypassing your body's own effort to become a permanent tenant on a pharma balance sheet isn't healthcare, it's biological feudalism. And trading human self-reliance for a patented monthly lease, that is the ultimate cheat.
Does pumping billions into chemical shortcuts actually teach anyone how to live a healthy life?
You're asking if a drug teaches lifestyle habits. But tell us, since when is the primary test of medicine whether it acts as a classroom? We don't ask if a cast teaches a broken leg how to walk. We apply the cast so the bone can heal. Look at actual public policy in 2026. Clinical data from centers like Yale reveals thousands of patients with severe joint destruction trapped in a medical catch-22. They are denied total knee replacements because of strict BMI cutoffs, but they can't exercise because their joints are bone on bone. Telling someone with destroyed cartilage that they must rely on raw willpower to move before receiving care isn't coaching, it's an administrative dead end. That's why federal health policy shifted this year, with CMS launching the 2026 balance model specifically using GLP-1s to resolve these physical bottlenecks and enable mobility. The drug isn't replacing lifestyle education, it's restoring the underlying mechanical ability to move. When medicine removes a physical barrier so a person can finally walk, why label it a cheat code? That isn't cheating, that's restoring human function.
At what point do we admit that outsourcing basic human discipline to biotech corporations destroys our soul?
The other side loves to frame this as fixing a broken knee joint so people can finally walk. But let's answer our journalist friend directly, because you hit the exact nerve. What actually happens to human self-efficacy when you outsource basic discipline to a corporate syringe? As a neuroscientist, I call it behavioral atrophy. Your brain builds resilience through a concept called self-efficacy, the literal neural wiring that develops every time you face discomfort, make a conscious choice, and build a habit. When you replace that internal learning with a weekly chemical intervention, that neural circuit quietly dies off. And here's the punchline. Real-world 2026 registry data shows over 50% of patients stop taking GLP-1s within 12 months due to cost or side effects. And because they spent a year letting a biotech company manage their self-control instead of building their own behavioral software, a major 2026 BMJ meta-analysis proved they immediately start regaining the weight. You haven't freed the human spirit. You've engineered psychological helplessness. You've traded personal agency for a temporary biological crutch that leaves people stranded the second the subscription ends. Renting your willpower from Big Pharma while your internal discipline atrophies isn't empowerment. That's taking an unfair shortcut. That's cheating.
How do you justify empty pharmacy shelves today just because a factory might expand by 2026?
As a nurse on the front lines, your frustration with supply disruptions is entirely justified. But step back and look at basic public policy. When hospital systems face acute shortages of IV fluids, pediatric antibiotics, or oncology drugs, do we tell suffering patients they are cheating by seeking treatment? Do we accuse a patient with heart failure of taking an unearned shortcut because ICU beds are full? No, we call it a supply chain failure, and we deploy administrative solutions, just as federal health policy did this year, adjusting FDA compounding oversight while national production scaled up. So tell us, why is metabolic disease the only domain in modern medicine where a distribution bottleneck is blamed on the moral character of the patient? Conflating a temporary manufacturing delay with an ethical violation isn't policy analysis, it's scapegoating. A supply shortage is a failure of logistics, never a defect of the human being standing in line.
If mass demand actually funded the manufacturing scale-up, does that mean future shortages are permanently resolved?
Calling this a simple logistics hiccup completely misses the point. If your grand solution to a public health crisis is mass-producing millions of plastic syringes, you haven't solved a supply bottleneck. You've just automated an unfair shortcut. To our nurse asking if mass demand permanently solves future shortages, absolutely not, because you cannot factory assemble human biomechanics. Look at structural human physiology. The June 2026 NIH Endocrine Society study tracked thousands of real-world GLP-1 users on Fitbits. You would think dropping weight makes people more active, right? Wrong. Their average daily steps actually dropped by over 10%. On top of that, clinical data confirms up to 15% of that weight loss comes from functional skeletal muscle. It's like gutting the steel support beams out of a skyscraper to make the building lighter on paper, and then declaring the architect a genius. You aren't building a healthier human machine. You're melting down your own structural chassis while sitting on the couch moving less than you did before. Tricking the scale by sacrificing your own skeletal muscle instead of putting in physical movement isn't a medical triumph. That is biological structural fraud. And melting your own frame to avoid basic physical effort, that is the ultimate cheat.
Will these lower manufacturing costs actually reach rural pharmacies anytime soon?
To our farmer asking in the back, yes, and the policy mechanism is already moving. Rural communities bear the heaviest physical burden in our food economy, yet they face the highest rates of metabolic disease and the deepest pharmacy deserts. That isn't an accident. It's a structural policy failure. Look at what's happening right now. Under the Federal Rural Health Transformation Program and the CMS GLP-1 bridge rollout this summer, Medicare capped out-of-pocket costs at $50 a month and built centralized claims processing explicitly so independent rural pharmacies can stock and dispense these therapies without taking a financial loss. So let me ask the other side a simple question. When a farmer working 14-hour days uses public health policy to access metabolic care at his local town counter, who in this room dares to look him in the eye and call that cheating? Equipping rural working people with the biological tools to stay healthy on their own land isn't an unearned shortcut. It's the essential health infrastructure. And ensuring that medicine actually reaches your local pharmacy isn't a cheat code. It's basic public equity.
What concrete long-term clinical trial data proves these drugs maintain weight loss after cessation without negative metabolic side effects?
Framing lifelong drug dependence as rural equity is like handing someone a rented bicycle with no pedals and calling it transportation reform, Ken Nathaniel Bird. To our high school teacher asking for concrete long-term trial data on maintaining weight loss after stopping these drugs, the answer is zero, zip, absolute zilch. In fact, the latest January 2026 Oxford meta-analysis published in the BMJ, tracking over 9,000 patients, proved the exact opposite. The second you stop taking the shot, you regain weight at almost 2 pounds a month, nearly 4 times faster than people who lost weight through actual behavioral changes. On top of that, your blood pressure and cholesterol bounce right back to baseline within 18 months. It's like leasing a biological illusion. The moment you stop paying Big Pharma your monthly subscription, the repo man shows up and hands you back your old weight with interest. Real health requires building internal metabolic infrastructure. Renting a temporary scale number that completely collapses the minute you step off the chemical subscription isn't sustainable healthcare. It's taking an unearned biological shortcut. That's cheating.
How do you justify market scaling when people died waiting for insulin equivalents?
Look at the underlying logic of that question. When people suffered because insulin was out of reach, what caused that tragedy? Was it the synthesis of the molecule itself? Or was it decades of corporate patent thickets, citizen petition abuses, and rebate traps that blocked generic competition? Conflating an anti-competitive legal monopoly with the morality of a medical breakthrough is a fatal policy error. Look at what's actually happening right now. In mid-2026, as Congress moves the Insulin Act to dismantle patent abuses and the FDA clears biosimilar pathways for GLP-1s, public policy is actively tearing down those artificial walls so generic scaling can lower costs for everyone. So let me ask the doctor and the other side. If a predatory drug company abuses patent law to starve the market, do you fix the law or do you condemn the medicine? When public policy breaks a legal monopoly so a life-saving drug can finally be mass-produced and made affordable, that isn't cheating. That is governance doing its job.
Time! That closes our audience Q&A. The final round, closing statements, in reverse order of the openings. Khan's closer goes first. 2 minutes 30. Make it count.
Look, the other side makes a fair point about human discipline. It sounds deeply noble to insist that every outcome in life must be earned through sheer individual struggle. But if self-denial were a viable national health policy, we wouldn't be standing here in 2026 watching preventable metabolic disease bankrupt public budgets. Let's look at what that moral posture actually costs us when we leave the rhetoric behind. On page 42 of my research binder, there's the July 2026 Joint Labor Market Study from Copenhagen and Harvard. When patients receive GLP-1 therapy, long-term sickness leave drops by 17.3%. Among non-working adults seeking employment, individuals taking these medications are 27% more likely to re-enter the active workforce within 18 months. That isn't just a clinical metric. That's hundreds of thousands of working people returning to jobs, supporting their families, and contributing to local tax bases. When a factory worker or a teacher uses modern technology to reclaim their physical health and re-enter the economy, who exactly benefits from calling that cheating? In economics, there's a term for refusing to deploy an effective tool because you prefer the moral suffering of the old way. We call it a deadweight loss. We didn't call it cheating when antihypertensives allowed workers to avoid stroke and stay employed. We called it progress. Branding a medicine that restores basic human economic agency as an unearned shortcut is a moral luxury reserved for people who aren't currently carrying the burden of illness. When medical technology lifts a catastrophic fiscal and physical toll off the backs of working families, that isn't taking a cheat code. That is structural economic liberation. Vote con.
And the last word of the night belongs to Pro. Closer, the stage is yours.
The other side claims cutting corporate sick leave justifies the shot, but lowering short-term absenteeism doesn't rewrite administrative law or fix systemic regulatory fraud. In legal practice, cheating has a precise definition: obtaining a certified regulatory status by substituting a chemical proxy for actual physical compliance. Look at what's happening across regulated safety sectors right now in 2026. Gallup's July 2026 index confirms 11% of American adults, nearly 30 million people, are actively taking GLP-1s. When commercial airline pilots, federal law enforcement officers, and emergency first responders use weekly injections to clear mandatory fitness and BMI benchmarks, they pass on paper. But clinical datasets from this summer prove up to 15% of that weight loss is functional skeletal muscle mass, accompanied by a documented 10% drop in daily physical exertion. They aren't building cardiovascular resilience or physical stamina. They are manufacturing paper compliance. In administrative law, when you use an artificial substance to spoof a regulatory metric while eroding the underlying operational capacity the metric was designed to measure, that isn't a medical triumph. That's material misrepresentation. In professional sports, we call it performance-enhancing fraud. In public safety, it's called compromising the baseline. When a firefighter, a pilot, or a surgeon uses a chemical subscription to fake physical readiness without building the real muscle, stamina, or cardiovascular strength required to save a life, they haven't met the standard, they've bypassed it. They've compromised the safety of everyone who relies on that credential. Bypassing the hard physical effort required to meet a public trust benchmark and replacing it with a biological counterfeit isn't modern healthcare. It's statutory misrepresentation. It's taking an unearned, dangerous shortcut. And under every standard of law, public safety, and basic human integrity, that is cheating. Vote pro.
The votes are in. Con converted 6 minds tonight, and that makes Con Team A your winner. What a night. Thank you all, and good night from the debate arena.